If you're drawn to stories filled with gentle wisdom, a bit of mystery, and a whole lot of heart, then today's book just might be for you. Today I'll be covering The Good Husband of Zebra Drive by Alexander McCall Smith. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we are covering the 8th book in the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series, which everyone who watches this channel knows I love this series. Now, I've had a few friends pick up this series recently, and they have said that they don't quite love it as much as I do. And I think the reason why is I've become really invested in it. And I will say that the first book in the series, where you're still getting to know the characters, it might take a little bit for you to fully appreciate everyone in the books. And I have certainly gotten to that point. I'm actually nearly done with this series. I am going to finish up by the end of the year. So this is actually just covering a backlog. And for that reason, I have decided in these videos that it's really important for me to focus on telling the storyline, because with 24 books thus far, it could continue. The big thing that I have to contribute with these videos is giving a little synopsis, especially since I think they're all really good. And I think that what I like about each book, it is going to be essentially the same from one to the next. There might be a few plot lines that I don't necessarily like as much, and there certainly might be some characters that I don't like as much as some of the others. But I will say in this book, you are having all of the good stuff that has happened in all of the other books before this, and it is by and large one of the books I really appreciate in the series. Then again, I appreciate all of the books in this series. This book, just like all of them, it takes place in Gaborone, Botswana, which is the capital, although still not a very big city. If you know anything about Botswana, it is not a densely populated country, although it is one of the more successful countries after decolonization, economically speaking, and in terms of political stability. That's one of the things that you might find interesting about the main character, Precious Ramotswe, who, if you know, I can't say her last name very well, so I usually just refer to her as Precious, even though in the books she is not referred to as Precious. She always has nice things to say about government officials. She seems to be very appreciative that Botswana is politically stable and did not have any of the major issues that you see in a lot of other countries in the years after decolonization. And in this book, you have her, as usual, using her keen insights and her kindness, trying to solve problems, and of course, just be a good person to the people around her. In this book, The Good Husband of Zebra Drive, Precious Ramotswe, I'll just call it Precious from now on, finds herself dealing with not one, but several intriguing cases. For starters, her cousin, Tati Monyena, brings her a mystery from the hospital in Matekoni, where 3 patients have mysteriously died in the same bed at the same time on the same day of the week. It's a case that really challenges her detective instincts as she uncovers the details behind a very tragic event. And this is, of course, one of the many storylines in which you see Precious making choices that are above and beyond just trying to solve a mystery, but trying to help everyone come to the proper resolution in that case. At the same time, her assistant, Mma Makutsi, who I will just call Grace, even though I can say Makutsi much better than Ramotswe. Anyway, she steps up to take on her first solo case. Up to this point, she has been an assistant that has had some help in the cases. She's tried to figure out ways to be more helpful, but this is the first one in which she is actually going to take on a case by herself, and she is using her title as associate detective. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but a big part of Grace and her character is she comes from a lowly community. She, of course, got an unprecedented 97% on her exams at the Botswana Secretarial College, yet she is very obsessed with positions and titles, and this is one of those times where choosing to call herself a detective instead of a secretary or whatever else title she would use at the agency is really starting to show through. And so she is going to actually investigate the theft at a local printing company, and she's going to try to pinpoint which employee is responsible. And of course, she's also, as usual, facing many of her own challenges in her life. She is, of course, recently engaged, as you may recall from my previous videos, to a somewhat wealthy man. His father owns a furniture store that appears to be doing well, and that is affecting her interaction with Precious, and it is putting a little tension in the agency, and we'll see how that plays out. Of course, it's not only the ladies that are really testing their detective skills. Precious's husband, Mr. J.L.B. Matekoni. He is the best mechanic in Botswana, as she always says, wants to try his hand at detection also. Although he seems to be a little more dragged into it, it doesn't quite have the same appeal to him as it does to his wife. And so he takes on the case of Faith Batumil, a woman who's convinced that her husband is cheating on her. And so with his usual earnestness and charm, Mr. J.L.B. Matekoni brings his own approach to this investigation, which, let's just say, he's good at what he does, and he is very thoughtful, like his wife. But there are going to be some moments of mix-up in this one that will have some humorous elements. But don't forget, he himself is a very upright and diligent person. So even with the mix-ups, he works really hard to make the best of a situation. So that is another one of the interesting storylines that is being told here. And then we have a few side stories of note. There's, of course, Charlie, who is one of the young apprentices, although he's the older of the two young apprentices at the garage. And he actually tries to start his own taxi business with a used car, a nice car, dreaming of independence. But if you know anything about the two apprentices at the shop, Charlie just struggles with being focused, and we'll see how that turns out in his efforts at trying to start his own business. I think that's enough of the general storylines that you need to know from this. I don't like to spill the actual resolution to the mysteries. I don't know why you'd be watching these videos. Those are much more interesting to read about. I just want to give you a simple basis of what happens for him. And as you can see, one of the highlights of this series is that Precious is the best detective, but her detective skills and abilities spreads to people, and you see them taking their own approaches to solving mysteries. And I find that a fascinating element about this, because they all have their own strengths and weaknesses, and you see them playing to them. And this is, of course, one of the books where you see a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and some of them are more successful than others, and it's a lot of fun to read. I will say that this book, just like any others in this series, I love the language. I love the things that the author chooses to focus on. I would say that the dialogue is always entertaining. And I will also say that there's a lot of little things about this series that I really like. And I think, I don't know if I've focused on this before, but if I haven't, I'll focus on it in this review. And I think one of the things that I really like is Precious's love for traditional culture. For sure, she always calls herself traditionally built, as opposed to calling herself that. But she has an appreciation for the traditional culture of Botswana. Now, that being said, she does not consider herself some kind of reactionary. She's always talking about how she certainly believes in appreciating the times that you live in, and dramatic changes, but she also is constantly concerned with how much everything is changing and how that might affect our ability as individuals to be good people, to interact in a society, in a neighborhood, in a community, in any way. That seems to be something that's really driving her and really helping her to decide exactly what kind of Botswana she wants to live in, and really working towards creating that type of Botswana. And I think that's something that I really enjoy about these books, that I want to focus in about that on this one, and you really can find in all of them. But again, you'll just find her not just questioning traditional norms, but trying to express appreciation for them and explain why things were done the way that they were. For example, her whole career comes from the fact that her father was really good at picking and breeding cattle, and so she has some wealth at the beginning of the series. And so there's a lot of discussion of cattle, even though there's rarely actual cattle in the books, because the cattle are all off on some farm and she lives in a city. Yet this appreciation for them, I think, really shows so much. So who's this for? Well, it's another great book in the series. So if you've read any other books in the series, then I think this is another good one. But I don't recommend reading it on its own. Who's it not for? Well, anyone that is, you know, struggling to want to read a book series that already has 24 installments. We will, of course, see as more, if more, come out. But I will say otherwise, this is a great read for people that enjoy not just the detective elements, but all of the other characters and understanding their lives and trying to appreciate how someone might go about solving a mystery. And I would also say it's a good contrast to a lot of the other mystery novels I've been reading lately, or crime novels, I should say, because it doesn't have that same like grittiness. Even though you may be dealing with like actually really significant events, I still think that they strive to be a little more lighthearted, and I appreciate that in this series, especially after I've come off reading so many neo-noir and just books that have a lot more grit and grime tone that I don't necessarily love, or maybe I've just had too much of it recently. I don't know. But either way, I would say that this book is great for having that slightly more lighthearted approach to detective work. Of course, let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.